What happens when one woman dares to challenge the entire system? Can she really bring it crashing down? It sounds like a movie plot, but it unfolded right in the heart of Washington, D.C., where truth had long been buried beneath black robes and silence was wielded like a weapon. Then a phone went live. A voice cut through the courtroom, and a name, Caroline Leavitt, ignited the biggest political earthquake America has seen in a decade. The story you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a headline that never made the evening news, a secret war no one dared to fully expose. And in a world where truth usually arrives too late, this time it showed up right on time, and it hit like a bomb. Welcome to Black Footprints, where the stories you'll never hear on the 8 o'clock news are told with truth, raw emotion, and sometimes righteous fury. If you believe justice shouldn't come from those in power, but from those with the courage to speak up, hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. Under the pale glow of early morning, sunlight poured across the marble steps of the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse, an institution long known for its solemn silence and the weight of the law. But today, that silence had been shattered. The scene now pulsed like a political battlefield on the verge of eruption. Media crews swarmed the plaza like vultures circling their prey, cameras locked in on one figure stepping out of an armored SUV. She wasn't a judge. She wasn't a senator. She was Caroline Leavitt, former White House press secretary under President Donald Trump, and the woman the press had dubbed the conservative firebrand of American media. As Caroline crossed the threshold of the courthouse, the sharp click of her heels echoed like a war drum, rousing tension and curiosity in equal measure. Her dark brown hair was neatly tucked behind her ears, her gaze sharp enough to slice through glass. There was no hesitation, no flinch, just a woman who knew exactly why she was here, to call out the truth, even if that truth threatened to bring the entire system crashing down. On the bench sat Judge Edward Branson, notorious for his cold, calculated rulings in high-profile political cases. His face was carved in stone, his expression unreadable, but his eyes? They gleamed with the arrogance of a man who believed his seat was untouchable. To many, Branson wasn't just a judge. He was the final relic propping up the legacy of the Biden administration. Caroline stepped up to the witness podium. No one stopped her, but the room held its breath. Everyone knew. If there was anyone bold enough to bend the atmosphere of a federal courtroom to her will, it was her. "We can't keep pretending anymore," Caroline declared, her voice tolling like a cathedral bell. "Joe Biden betrayed America. He threw open our borders, let criminals pour in, and sold out our people for cheap political points. This wasn't policy, it was treason." The courtroom erupted. Whispers surged. Reporters clacked away at their keyboards, and a few scoffed in disbelief. But Judge Branson? His face turned a furious shade of red. He slammed his gavel down like a sledgehammer. "Miss Leavitt, this is a courtroom, not a political circus. I am fining you $100,000 for contempt." A tense hush swept across the room, but Caroline didn't blink. She smiled, cool, unwavering. "Then I'll pay in dollars," she replied, "but you'll pay in truth." And that truth didn't stay inside four walls. Because in her hand, Caroline held a smartphone that had been live streaming the entire hearing on X. Over 50,000 people were already watching, doubling within minutes. In this era, you don't need a gavel to hold power. Caroline turned a courtroom designed to silence her into a stage for revolution. And Branson's gavel? It didn't shut her down. It launched the loudest political reckoning of the year. That day, America didn't just witness a hearing. They witnessed a declaration of war against the old guard. And at the center of it, a young woman with fire in her soul and a phone that wouldn't stop telling the truth. The storm didn't start with thunder. It started with a smirk, a phone held high, and a voice like cold steel. "I was fined $100,000 for speaking the truth. But I won't be silent. And neither should you." With a single tap, Caroline Leavitt turned a federal courtroom into a global stage. On a live stream with black background and white letters, her face appeared sharp, resolute, unshaken. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom, her words rang out, crisp and cutting, each sentence like a nail driven into the hearts of those watching. This isn't justice. This is suppression, and I won't let it pass quietly. Viewer counts skyrocketed, from thousands to tens of thousands in under a minute. By the third minute, the number had soared past 300,000. By the sixth, over 800,000, an unstoppable storm sweeping across America. Mainstream newscasts were left in the dust. Hashtags like hashtag truth costs 100K and hashtag stand with Caroline exploded to #1 nationwide. Phones lit up across the country, in offices, cafes, and sidewalks. Those who had stayed silent now began typing. The indifferent started sharing, and the skeptical began to listen. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun hadn't even burned off the tension in the air when the crowd supporting Caroline surged forward. American flags waved, signs reading "No More Lies" hoisted high. Chants of justice for Caroline echoed through the streets. On the other side, the opposition gathered too. Supporters of the old administration holding banners that read, "Respect the law," and "Silence isn't betrayal." The atmosphere boiled. Voices clashed. Shoves were exchanged. Police scrambled to erect barricades. But emotions had already breached every wall. The media descended, cameras spinning, capturing every moment of what was no longer just a political clash, but a war of belief. A few miles away, inside a high-security room in the U.S. Department of Justice, Attorney General Pam Bondi sat frozen before a massive screen. On it, Caroline's live feed, her voice firing shots straight into the heart of the system. Bondi didn't sip her coffee. She didn't blink. She watched each frame like it was a top-secret dossier marked urgent. For months, she had tracked Judge Branson. She had the files, the testimonies, the buried evidence. But she needed a spark, a moment when justice wouldn't just be right, it would be undeniable. And that moment was here, right now, in front of her, in front of America, on a screen blazing with 3 bold words. Live, Caroline Leavitt. Bondi turned to her aide. Her voice was calm, but final. "Call Hank Vickers," she said. "Tell him to stand by. It's time." Back in the courtroom, Caroline never broke eye contact with her phone's camera. She knew exactly who was watching. Not just friends, not just allies, but those who had doubted her, walked away from her, told her she was too loud. Now, they were all listening, and she was just getting started. On the 5th floor of the federal courthouse, far from the courtroom lights, beyond the echo of gavels and the roar of politics, sat a man in silence, hunched over a glowing screen. No suit, no grand speeches, no slogans raised amidst angry crowds. To most, Ethan Caldwell was just an IT guy, nothing more. But today, he held the key that could crack open the walls of an empire. Few knew that he and Caroline Leavitt had once shared the same college lecture hall, both journalism majors full of fire. She chose the spotlight. He chose the system, believing he could change it from the inside. But no one warned him. The system would try to crush you before it let you fix it. A year ago, Ethan had stumbled upon something buried in the courthouse servers. Strange anomalies in sentencing patterns. Mysterious edits to court records. Internal emails that never should have existed. All of it pointed to one man, Judge Edward Branson. The deeper Ethan dug, the darker it got. He did what any principled man would. He reported it. But instead of a thank you, he was called into a closed-door meeting. No legal counsel, just HR, and a pre-written confidentiality agreement dressed up as organizational discretion. The court doesn't need more problems, they said. Eyes fixed on paperwork instead of truth. Just focus on your job. So Ethan went quiet, but not to surrender, only to prepare. Late nights alone in the server room, he archived everything, every log, every document, every dirty email. He encrypted it all and sent it through a secure, anonymous channel to the only person he believed could act with integrity, Attorney General Pam Bondi. But Bondi couldn't make a move, not yet. A federal judge doesn't fall over a few secret files. Not in this political climate. If she acted too soon, the backlash would bury her. They'd call it Trump's revenge. No, she needed more than data. She needed a moment, a spark, a reckoning. And then Caroline went live. As her words exploded across the nation, Bondi reopened the file titled Branson, Internal Judicial Corruption. The silver folder was thick, hundreds of pages, each one sharpened like a blade by Ethan's quiet determination. She didn't need anything else. It was all there. And now, the world was watching. While the nation's eyes were glued to the courtroom, Ethan closed his laptop. No applause, no fanfare, just a faint glow of dawn pushing through the skyline. Caroline had sounded the bell. Bondi was drawing her sword. And Ethan, the ghost in the machine, was the spark that had been waiting to ignite. A quiet game, yes, but never aimless. A single drop timed perfectly, and the whole lake shattered. There are moments that need no narration, because the silence that follows says everything. And on that morning, in a frame broadcast live to millions on the platform X, America witnessed the fall of a symbol once believed untouchable, the bench of a federal judge. Caroline Leavitt was still live streaming, unshaken, eerily calm. Her voice sliced through the tension like a blade across taut wire, every word precise, deliberate. Then, from the back of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors burst open. Footsteps echoed, measured, unflinching, striking the marble like war drums from a past, now colliding with the present. Every head turned, and then she entered. Pamela Bondi, dressed in black like a living declaration of justice, her face expressionless, her eyes sharp enough to still the air. Behind her, for U.S. Marshals, standing tall and immovable like pillars of law. Hank Vickers, the lead marshal, gave her a subtle nod. That was all she needed. Bondi advanced toward the bench, where Judge Edward Branson still sat, frozen, as if carved in stone, unable to comprehend that his era had just ended. Judge Branson, Bondi began, her voice steady, chilling. Based on evidence uncovered in a federal internal investigation, and under the authority of the U.S. Department of Justice, you are under arrest for abuse of power, political bias, and manipulating the federal judicial system. The room exploded with gasps. Some stood in shock. Others stared, wide-eyed, mouths open. And Branson? He rose slowly, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. You have no authority here. I'm a federal judge. Bondi raised the arrest warrant, the red seal gleaming in the light. The law doesn't make exceptions for power, she said. Not today. Two marshals stepped forward, gripped his arms, and pulled them behind his back. The click of the handcuffs wasn't loud, but it sounded like the slam of a vault door on a dying regime. Caroline's live stream counts surged. Nearly 1 million viewers now watching history unfold in real time. Comments flooded the screen. Justice. It's happening. Branson is done. Caroline didn't miss a beat. She raised her phone higher, the lens capturing Branson being led away. No longer a stone figure of authority, but a disgraced man dragged from the seat he once thought unshakable. Then she turned the camera back on herself. Her eyes were fierce, like sparks dancing in the wind. The old system is cracking, she said. Now it's time to rebuild. On truth, not fear. Those words didn't just echo. They engraved themselves into history. They raced through social media, into newsrooms, and into the hands of citizens holding their phones with trembling conviction. That day, justice wasn't just delivered. It was seen. It was felt. And, most importantly, it was believed in again. That afternoon, the skies over Washington, D.C. darkened like a breaking news alert flashing on a white screen. Fast, ominous, and hard to ignore. Hours earlier, Judge Edward Branson had been cuffed before millions in a courtroom broadcast that shook the nation. But just as Caroline Leavitt stepped out of that historic blaze of justice, climbing into her black armored SUV, the shadow of retaliation was already tailing her every move. It started with a gray Dodge Charger, unmarked and too close in the rearview mirror. Then a Ford Escape swerved out ahead, cutting her lane at an intersection like it was choreographed. There were no flashing lights, no warning sirens, only the deadly stillness of those who didn't want her to speak again. A small drone zipped overhead, flashing briefly before disappearing into the clouds. Caroline didn't need to ask. She knew. This wasn't an online smear or an angry tweet thread. This was a real-world takedown. Calculated, tracked, tactical. She wasn't armed, but the man in the front seat was. Nick Ramsey, former Navy SEAL, now her personal security advisor, had earned her absolute trust the moment she took the podium as press secretary. His eyes remained fixed on the road, but his voice was calm as stone. "They're here," he said, reaching for his Glock 19, drawing it with the reflex of a man who'd done this in darker places for higher stakes. "Head down. Lock the doors. I've got the rest." And just like that, the chase was on. Down Constitution Avenue, the SUV tore through traffic, weaving between lanes, while two hostile vehicles followed like predators locked onto their prey. Nick twisted the wheel, clipped a side mirror, stomped the gas, then slammed the brakes, spinning the SUV into a hard juke that sent one of the pursuers into the median. The second kept up, but Nick knew the city better than any map. He veered sharply toward a service tunnel near the Library of Congress, a blind spot under constant FBI surveillance, rigged with cameras and man checkpoints. Within moments, the SUV disappeared into federal protection. When the doors locked behind them, Nick turned to Caroline. "This is just the beginning." Meanwhile, inside the Department of Justice, Pamela Bondi sat in a war room with her internal task force. The moment she was briefed on the attempted pursuit, she didn't flinch, just furrowed her brow, then gave a slow, knowing nod, like watching the final puzzle piece snap into place. "We've hit the deepest layer of this system," she said, her voice calm but simmering. "And they know they're losing control." She immediately signed off on enhanced federal protection for Caroline, top-tier security typically reserved for heads of state. And then, without hesitation, she activated a covert task force. Codename, Spearfall. Their mission? Track down every shadow organization tied to political remnants still operating behind the scenes. The kind of players who'd rather use a drone than debate, who thrived in darkness and died under light. In this new battlefield, courtrooms were no longer the front lines. The real fight was happening underground, behind curtains, beneath headlines, and deep in the corridors of power. But this time, Caroline wasn't walking in blind, and she wasn't walking alone. Beside her stood Nick, unwavering. Behind her, an entire generation tired of being silenced. The second phase of this war had officially begun, not in the courtroom, but in the places light hadn't touched until now. And this time, the light is coming fast. They thought Edward Branson's fall was the end, that once the cuffs clicked and his name hit the headlines, the truth would quietly fade, the chair wiped clean, and passed down to the next loyal pawn. What they didn't realize was that this was only the prologue. In a secure basement beneath the Department of Justice, dim light flickered against lines of code dancing across a monitor. Ethan Caldwell, once silenced by the very system he served, was now doing what no ordinary IT specialist dared, unearthing secrets buried by the powerful. The file was labeled Civic Shield. On the surface, it sounded like a civic program, but within, it was a black dossier, a map of judicial rot. 12 names, 12 key positions spanning federal courts from coast to coast, and every one of them tied to the same cancer: abuse of power, politically driven rulings, buried evidence, and a systematic war on dissent. Inside each file were encrypted emails, internal memos, hidden meeting logs with lobbyists, and financial trails disguised as charitable giving. Nothing in the Civic Shield files was random. Everything pointed to one thing: a coordinated shadow network cloaked in robes and gavels. When Ethan placed the thick stack of documents on the table, Pamela Bondi sat in silence. Long, cold, focused, she flipped through the pages slowly, not just reading, but seeing a nation's moral compass split open. "This can't stay buried," she finally said, eyes never leaving the text, no matter the fallout. Caroline Leavitt nodded. "Then we go public. Full broadcast. No edits. No filters." A plan came together within hours. In 48 hours, the documents would be unveiled at a national press event. The location: the National Press Building. Platforms: X, Newsmax, Rumble, Fox News, and over 100 radio affiliates. This wasn't just a scandal. It would be a trial by public consciousness, where the people would become the jury and the veil of power would be ripped apart for all to see. But high above Manhattan, in a sleek glass office on the 41st floor, a secure line buzzed to life. The room smelled of leather and cigars. A voice, low, cold, sharp as steel, spoke into the receiver. The files leaked. Narratives slipping. Activate Counter-Strike. Hours later, the smear campaign began. Doctored emails, manufactured scandals, fake affairs, whisper campaigns flooded social media, attempting to smear both Caroline and Bondi. Left-leaning blogs published altered versions of the Civic Shield files, casting doubt, seeding confusion. The backlash came fast like a flood. But this time, Caroline and Bondi had built a dam. Because they didn't just have evidence. They had the trust of millions. Americans tired of being lied to, manipulated, and ruled by shadows. And when the Civic Shield files went public, no matter how loud the noise or sharp the knives, the truth rang out. Not like gunfire, but like a church bell shattering the dawn. Waking up a country that had slept too long beneath the illusion of justice. In the backstage room of the National Press Building, where in just a few hours the explosive Civic Shield files would be unveiled to the entire country, the fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over a moment no one had seen coming. A reunion wrapped not only in the colors of the past, but soaked in wounds that never healed and ideals that had only just begun to awaken again. Ethan Caldwell stepped through the door slowly, like he was walking across 1,000 old memories. He froze when he saw Caroline Leavitt, the woman he once debated with for hours in college classrooms, back when they both studied journalism, fueled by late-night coffee and fierce arguments over justice, freedom, and the cost of truth. Time had pulled them down separate paths. He had stayed inside the system, quietly trying to fix it. She had stood up and challenged it head-on. And now, in this unexpected moment, they were no longer Ethan and Caroline, the idealistic students of yesterday. They were soldiers on the same battlefield, carrying wounds that still bore their names. Caroline turned. Her eyes flickered with surprise, then steadied. She took a step forward. No smile. No tensión. Just calm recognition. "How long's it been?" she asked, her voice low and steady, like the room itself. 7 years, Ethan replied. "And 3 times I almost called. I just didn't have the guts." Caroline looked at him, the same man who once stood up for a student newspaper story when no one else would. Now, he was the one who had dropped the files that could shake the entire justice system to its core. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, a flicker of sorrow in her gaze. "We only differed on timing." Ethan gave a half-smile, grateful, and a little broken. There was nothing left to explain between them, just the quiet understanding that sometimes history is made not by those who agree, but by those who hurt the same way. Across the room, Nick Ramsey, Caroline's silent, ever-watchful protector, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He'd said little in the weeks they'd worked together. But when he saw Caroline and Ethan shake hands, he stepped forward, something long buried, rising behind his calm expression. "Ethan," he nodded. Then, turning to Caroline, "I think it's time you knew why I stayed." Caroline looked at him puzzled. She knew Nick's background, ex-SEAL, razor-sharp instincts, unmatched loyalty. But she had never asked why he chose to be her shield. She respected his silence. Now he broke it. "My sister, Melissa," he began, voice thick. "She was wrongly convicted 3 years ago. The trial lasted 2 days. No real evidence. Her lawyer was swapped out last minute. And the judge who sentenced her." Nick paused, jaw tightening. "Was Edward Branson." The room froze. Caroline clenched her fists. Ethan bowed his head. No one said anything, because nothing needed to be said. They all understood. Each carried a private wound. Each had lost something they couldn't get back. 3 people, 3 stories, once divided by belief, now united not by ideology, but by loss. And from the cracks of that loss, something stronger had formed, a bond not built on politics or power, but on the price of silence and the courage to speak anyway. Outside the room, stage lights began to glow. 30 minutes until the world would watch. Caroline stood tall. She looked at them both. One was a memory, the other a shield. And with unwavering resolve, she said, "Today isn't just about truth. It's about giving back a piece of justice to those who lost everything. Even if it's only a fraction, it still matters." Then together, they walked into the light. From her high-rise office overlooking the Capitol Plaza, Caroline Leavitt stood in stillness, bathed in the soft blush of dawn brushing against the frosted glass. Her hand rested on a wooden frame hanging near the window. A simple white paper inside bore a number, $100,000. The fine for contempt of court she had received less than a week ago. But instead of shame, it hung like a medal of honor. A marker in time for the day truth was no longer a whisper, but a war cry. Behind her, the room was quiet. But across the country, America's heart was pounding. Judge Edward Branson had been suspended, awaiting trial. The image of him handcuffed in open court had become the lasting symbol of a collapsing era. A justice system that once believed it was above justice itself, now consumed by the very law it sought to bend. Meanwhile, Pamela Bondi hadn't paused for breath. She had launched Operation Justice Reform Sweep, an unprecedented federal campaign to investigate every judge and legal official implicated in the Civic Shield files. One by one, the names were unveiled. From D.C. to Pennsylvania, Illinois to Arizona, a wave of reckoning swept through the country's highest courts, pulling back the curtain on politically tainted verdicts long hidden behind robes and rituals. Each morning, Americans woke not just to coffee, but to another breaking headline. Another judge called in, another layer peeled back. And among those headlines, one name kept rising, Caroline. Not as a politician, not as a party's figurehead, but as a banner for every citizen sick of false justice disguised as law. The national address was broadcast live from the White House. Caroline stepped up to the podium, holding that very same fine in her hands. Cameras clicked. Flashbulbs flared. Every lens locked in on her every breath. She raised the paper above her head, smiled. "I was fined for speaking the truth," she said. "They wanted me afraid. But that price? I didn't pay it with money. I paid it with faith. And today, I'm not here to retell the pain. I'm here to announce this. We've won the first battle." The room erupted in applause. On X, a tweet from former President Donald Trump shot across the internet, shared more than 2 million times in under an hour. Caroline is the new flame of America, and that flame has burned through shadows once thought untouchable. Back at her office, Caroline sank into the old oak desk, one of the few relics left behind by a former president who once fought his own battles from the same seat. She glanced at the screen, thousands of messages pouring in. Thank yous, testimonies, cries for help, all of them playing like notes in a new democratic symphony still being written. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen. She stood, walking toward the window. Through the glass, the American flag fluttered gently in the clear air of a new day. And then, in a voice no one else could hear but herself, Caroline whispered, "They haven't seen anything yet. The fight has only just begun." And she was right, because once justice is awakened, it never goes back to sleep. Caroline wasn't just a voice. She was the architect of something new, a version of America where the law no longer serves power, but protects the people.